A 3-channel approach is your best bet. Having at least 8 touch points is still really important. That's still an evergreen truth that has not gone away. And cold calls work in every industry. So don't believe people that tell you that cold calling is dead. That's total BS. Using double taps. And what I mean by that is combining 2 touch points in a single day. So that could look like a LinkedIn Connect message that points to a LinkedIn InMail, and then the email points back to the Connect message. So you're doing the Connect message and the InMail on the same day. Value-based segmentation is about building in those additional layers so that you are creating smaller, tighter lists with more targeted focus on the messaging you can create. And what it allows you to do as a sales team then is create one set of messaging that can go to the entire list. It's the emails that say, hey, Leslie, I saw you went to the University of Montana, go Grizz. Anyways, the widget we sell is, do you want to book a meeting with me? What? I think it is such a mistake to have a sales team and not give them the tools that allow them to have hard data, which puts them in a position to take ownership of their improvement. And for me, I mentioned I really love doing handwritten notes. That is a pattern interrupt because it is something that people aren't doing. So a pattern interrupt is just doing the unexpected. Why would it matter enough to the person I'm talking to that they would want to spend their social capital butting up against the status quo to create change? I used to just do Excel lists with Microsoft Word and do a mail merge and send 300 emails out in 1 minute. If you're still doing that of mass send today, you are demolishing your domain reputation.
So let's start. So what is effective communication in 2024, given the state of B2B SaaS market and all this funding that is drying up?
Yeah, effective communication for outbound right now, I would say it has 3 tenets. One is that we need to make it so easy for our prospects to read and engage with any communication we're sending to them. We can create that ease by writing short, clear, concise emails. We can create that ease by removing friction from the process or making it easier for a prospect to get the value that we're trying to deliver. I would say that value is the second piece that's essential right now. If we are not sending outreach that is relevant to our prospects and valuable to our prospects, it's going to be really difficult to get their attention and get that engagement. And then I would say the third thing that is really interesting about outbound right now in 2024 is that folks tend to be going to one end of the spectrum or the other, one end being quality approaching an equality approach to outbound. So they're spending so much time trying to put in hyper personalization to every message to every prospect, or they're going the opposite direction, which everybody has seen this in their inbox, and they are using AI to just sort of spam their TAM with generic outreach. And I would say the third thing that is working to bridge the gap between the quality and the quantity approaches is something I call value-based segmentation, which is a play on personalization at scale. So I would say those are the big ones, like make it easy, removing friction, finding relevance and value that allows you to personalize at scale and really get your prospects' attention. So a lot going on in outbound right now.
So let's just get deeper. So you mentioned there's a lot going on. What new trends are emerging for this effective outbound marketing that you've noticed, something that has popped out in your awareness lately, like recently?
So new trends, I think everybody expects me to say AI. So I'll talk about AI a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
I would say first saw a negative trend. And the negative trend is that folks are using AI to personalize, and I'm using air quotes there because most of that personalization is disingenuous. What I mean by that is that it's the emails that say, "Hey, Leslie, I saw you went to the University of Montana. Go Grizz. Anyways, the widget we sell is, do you want to book a meeting with me?"
Mhm.
What?
Mhm.
Like, why would
Mhm.
talking about where I went to college, which isn't where that person went to college, be relevant in the context of the thing you're trying to sell? And I sort of joke that we can't tell prospects things they already know and expect them to care. I have a good friend who says we can't use our emails to read prospects the news. Congrats on your Series A. I see you're the founder at company X. That is not real personalization. I call it disingenuous. You can call it fake. You can call it pointless, whatever whatever terminology you want to use. But that's a real trend that I am seeing amplified by AI. And it's not something that is serving us as a sales profession. It's not something that's going to convert our prospects into meaningful conversations.
And you mentioned that there was this AI trend that's going on. There's a lot of quantity that's going on, and there's this hyper personalization that's going on. And you mentioned the value-based approach that you have. So just
Yeah.
tell us more about this value-based approach. How would you go about building that process?
Yes. Okay. So value-based segmentation, the gist of it is that we are going to take our ICP, which generally companies don't have as much clarity around their ICP as they think they do. You mentioned that I work with organizations that are in that 10 to 50 million revenue range. So generally what I see is that they have an ICP, like they're mature enough that they have that clear persona, but the persona might look something like director level and above finance executives in industry 1, 2, 3, or 4. So there's a bit of clarity, but for value-based segmentation to work, which is a personalization at scale play, you need to build some other layers into your ICP. So you need to further segment your ICP. What that might look like is instead of director level and above finance executive, you say only the CFO. And then instead of all 4 industries, you pick one specific industry. And then maybe you even go deeper. Maybe it isn't CPG. Maybe it is only CPG for beauty brands. And then we're going to build in some additional layers. So maybe a revenue band layer, only organizations between 1 and 3 billion. And the goal by building those layers in, by creating that more niche segment within your ICP, is that you can now create messaging that speaks much more accurately to that person. Because if we think about it, the priorities, the challenges and the opportunities that are top of mind for a director of finance, much different than a CFO, right? So we can't write one email, even if we have great industry or revenue band segmentation, we can't write one email that's going to be equally important to both of those. Even if we, let's use a different example. We're talking only to the CFO persona. But if it's the CFO persona and it's in CPG and pharmaceuticals and telecom, again, like we just cannot create messaging that we would be highly confident is relevant to that persona. So value-based segmentation is about building in those additional layers so that you are creating smaller, tighter lists with more targeted focus on the messaging you can create. And what it allows you to do as a sales team then is create one set of messaging that can go to the entire list. So the list is going to be small. Maybe it's only 72 people, 31 people. It's a much smaller list, but you can create one set of messaging that still works for all 72 of those people, instead of tasking your sales team with trying to find that disingenuous personalization token because you were told that personalization matters, and having to do that 72 times in a row and still get lower engagement rates because what you've said is not relevant or valuable to them.
Okay, so that's awesome. So let's just say we have the 72 people list now. We
Yeah.
have the messaging now. So what is your outbound ideal play will look like moving from there? So what steps will you take? And maybe we'll talk about how do you track those?
Absolutely. So a couple of things that I love to do, they're my kind of tried and true pieces of strategy that I drag and drop in to all of the sequences that I build for clients. One is be conscious of the state of overwhelm that your prospect feels and space out your touch points in accordance. So we are selling to maybe that CFO persona. We really need to keep in mind that they are probably getting 300 or 400 emails a day, and that they are trying to look at those emails in between how many meetings? 8, 10, 12 meetings a day, right? Like the CFO persona is one that is operating in a high state of overwhelm. They're frazzled. So we do not want to run sequences with them that are really, really heavy touch and short. Those don't tend to work as well. So one strategy I would give folks is that the more junior the persona you're reaching out to, the closer you want your touch points. The more senior the persona you're reaching out to, the more you want to stretch those touch points out, with the idea that you are giving them time to actually read your email before you send a new email. Sort of similar thinking is that the more senior, the more frazzled you think your ICP is, the shorter, the more concise and straightforward you want your emails to be, because they are not reading any executive, it doesn't matter, or really any prospect, even if they're a coordinator, somebody a little bit more junior in the company, they are not reading your email. They're scanning it and then deciding to either reply to it, like action it, do something, save it for later, or delete it. So if they delete it right away, you've lost. If they save it for later, that's still a win, because you still have an opportunity for them to maybe engage. Generally, they open it first on their phone and then later on their desktop. And obviously, if they engage, that's the best outcome. So by writing really short, concise, to the point, like easy to process emails, you're most likely to fall into the save for later or action bucket. And I would say the third piece of strategy that I drag and drop into all of my campaigns is using double taps. And what I mean by that is combining 2 touch points in a single day. So that could look like a LinkedIn Connect message that points to a LinkedIn in-mail, and then the email points back to the Connect message. So you're doing the Connect message and the in-mail on the same day. And by pointing the in-mail to the Connect message and vice versa, you are optimizing for increased accept and open rates for both of them. Or I'll often do a phone call and an email in the same day. And it's the similar logic. The phone call, assuming that you do not get a pickup, because pickup rates are 2 to 6%. So you're going to get a lot of voicemails. You leave a voicemail that points back to the email. And so then you're optimizing to increase your email open rates. So I love a double tap. I love a short and concise email to optimize for read and reply rates. And I like to be really thoughtful about the seniority of the prospect so that I am appropriately spacing my touch points for that persona.
Okay, so that's awesome. So obviously, in all of these emails and in all those messages and in all of those voice notes that you're sort of like leaving to them, what techniques, what strategies, because there's a lot of inbound material that you maybe you're utilizing, which you see real work right now. What would you recommend?
Say that a question again. Which strategies am I using to?
So, yeah, yeah. So sort of like you might be using some content to drive traffic and engagement via those emails. So what kind of content do you recommend will resonate? Maybe this customer list, I mean, this 72 list member list of those CFOs.
Yes. Okay. Great question on how to best leverage content in outbound. First
Yeah.
and foremost, folks, partner with your marketing team. I know for whatever reason, marketing and sales are supposed to be mortal enemies. And in many organizations, you might find yourself sort of siloed for marketing. So take it upon yourself to build that relationship, because to your point, Saad, having content to use in outbound is really valuable. A couple of ways I'm using content. I would say the easiest one for most people is sending assets like white papers or case studies or reports, things that the company is making. That's great. Do that. But two things that you probably need to pivot with your strategy if you are sending case studies, white papers, etc., to prospects. The first one is that if you do not have a super strong domain reputation, or you are talking to the domain of the prospect for the first time, the domain just being whatever is after the @ symbol in the email, you do not want to put that link to the link or the attachment to the testimonial, the case study in email 1, probably not even email 2. I like to hold it back for email 3. And the reason is because you are more likely to be flagged as spam or be routed out of the primary inbox if you're including attachments early. So tip 1 is think about holding those back until email 3, just so that you have a chance to get into that primary inbox. And then tip 2, if you are sending those white papers, those case studies, is remove the friction that your clients will experience when you're trying to give them value. So like think about you opening your inbox and somebody that you do not know sends you a 48-page white paper. Even if it is right up your alley, it is exactly what you want to read, that's still a lot, right? Like it's a lot to ask somebody to read an entire case study or entire white paper. What you want to do to remove that friction and expedite your prospect's ability to get value from the resources you're sending is pull out something specific that's relevant to them. So that can be an insight, it can be a quote, but pull out one short piece from that white paper or case study, highlight it, and then be specific about why it matters to your prospect. And then maybe a bonus tip 3, I'll often then include the full link to the white paper or the case study as a PS, so that it doesn't impact the length of my email copy. It's coming in as that PS. So that's one strategy to using content, but let me pause there.
Oh, okay, okay. So do you want to talk about some few more? I mean, that would be awesome because I really love this because you mentioned something which is important, and in the PS you have the entire case study, which is great.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any more content strategies if you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can tell, I'm a big believer in the always be testing philosophy when it comes to outbound. So I have so many fun creative strategies that are often either pattern interrupts or even if they're not a pattern interrupt, they are so deeply centering the buyer experience in the outbound strategy, because it's not about the email that we want to send. It's about how the prospect is going to engage in the email. So that's where those types of tips come from, to pull the the link down to the PS, to not send it until email 3, to remove friction by pulling out that specific reason that you are sending the white paper or the case study and telling them why it matters to them. One of my other favorite plays for content is to use, like, so I just actually created a campaign using an infographic, and I created my own infographic, which I have done my entire career, even when I was in corporate. If the asset didn't exist and marketing wasn't going to make it for me, if I needed it, I made it myself. And that is something that I encourage folks to think about. Don't hamstring yourself and hamper your success by saying, oh, I wish I had this piece of content, or I wish I had this asset or deposit to send to a prospect, but it's not in the marketing folder, so I guess I just won't send it. Like if you can't partner with marketing to get it created, think about creating it yourself. So I made a infographic to send to a group of heads of community and content that I'm prospecting to for a live AE masterclass that I'm hosting, and I want folks to sponsor it. So the infographic is 3 ways to build trust with the sales persona in 2024. And the theme of the sequence is, hey, we share the same ICP. Like, I'm selling to salespeople, you clearly are selling to salespeople. Here are 3 ideas I came up with to make sure that I'm getting in front of my ICP in 2024 that I also think you could benefit from. So I created this one infographic in Canva. It took me like 30 minutes tops, and I used it in email 1 and email 3. So the first email, and then a reply email. And then I used it in a LinkedIn InMail. And then I also posted it on LinkedIn as a piece of content, like a full post. And then either tagged the people in the campaign in the post or forwarded it to their inbox. So that is a really fun way to use a short, snappy piece of content. And I used it in 4 different ways, 4 different touch points, 1 content, 1 piece of content. If you maybe are not in a position to create your own content, maybe you would get in a little bit of trouble if you created your own content, but you, or maybe you're thinking to yourself, I want to have a LinkedIn, a social content play, but my prospect doesn't post on LinkedIn. So how do I engage? What does that look like for me? One other idea I would share with you is using not your content or your prospect's content, but making sure that you're following thought leaders in the space. Make sure that you're following like the big publications, the Reuters, the HBR, the Wall Street Journal. And when you see a post that is very relevant to your prospects, you can take that post and forward it to their inbox or tag people in it, or you can pull the whole link to those sorts of articles and use those in that sequence that we were talking about before. So it doesn't always have to be your company content. Sometimes it's better if it isn't, because it really feels like you are just giving value and there's no sort of secondary agenda. It really creates that reciprocity.
Okay, those are awesome tips. So, you've obviously mentioned LinkedIn and email call. So there are many options out there, gifting and all of that. So what mix do you recommend?
Ooh, what channel mix is such a tough question, because it does depend on who you are selling to, here's the litmus test I would ask people to give themselves. Are you on at least 3 channels? If you can't be on 3 channels, can you find a way to optimize the channels you are on? Meaning, if you are using phone and email as your only 2 channels, how are you not just thinking about phone connects, but how are you making sure that every voicemail you leave matters? It is so rare that I come in to work with an organization and that they have a script for voicemail. Everybody is just willy-nilly about it. But if you look at that 2 to 6% connect rate, you're not talking to very many people. Most of what you're doing on the phone is having the opportunity to leave voicemails. So the fact that we aren't being strategic about how we leave voicemails, making sure that they are concise because they're often transcribed and people read them, not listen to them, making sure that we are using the voicemail to point to that email or LinkedIn touch point, because it's highly unlikely somebody's going to call you back. It's much more likely they'll go look at the email that you sent. So really, again, centering the buyer. How is the buyer going to interact with that voicemail, and then creating a strategy around that. Or maybe texting, right? So like if you're only going to use 2 channels, how can you take that 1 channel phone and really make sure it's not just about phone calls? You're also thinking about a texting strategy. You're also thinking about a voicemail strategy. And I would also add to that litmus test, are you picking channels that allow you to meet your prospects where they are at? And the reason a 3-channel approach is sort of the minimum, my minimum, is because we need to acknowledge that our prospects have different communication preferences. And not everybody's going to want a cold call. Some people will, though. Not everybody is going to be checking their LinkedIn messages every, at least once a month. Some people will, though. So by creating at least 3 different communication approaches, you're really giving yourself the greatest potential to start conversations with your prospects where they want to have conversations. And one thing I would add to the idea of a multi-channel approach and picking your channels is, so often I hear sellers especially say, well, I would never answer a cold call. And then they use that as the justification for why they don't want to have cold calls in their sequences, or cold calls as one of their touches. It's not about you. It does not matter whether or not you would answer a cold call. Like that's such a seller-centric way of thinking, and it's still so prevalent. So a call to action to remember that you are not creating these sequences and you're not creating these touches based on your preferences. You're creating them with your buyer's preferences in mind, and with an understanding that if you are reaching out to 100 people, there's going to be multiple communication preferences in that batch. So giving them options to interact with you on a variety of channels will really optimize your chance of engagement.
Okay, that's awesome. So, still, I would love to know which channel is your favorite one, or maybe which channel has the highest conversion rate nowadays.
Favorite? Gosh, that's so hard, because it really does depend where your prospects live. I would say most common is doing email, phone, LinkedIn. Like I would say that's when I pick channels for clients. That's the most common approach, is picking those 3 channels. I run some really fun sales-led GTM plays, though, where we do direct mail. So that could be an approach. And I rarely recommend a gifting strategy is the direct mail approach. I much more often will do handwritten notes as my direct
Okay.
mail approach. So that's one that I do run fairly often, and it has, I mean, it's a pattern interrupt because very few people are taking the time to write a handwritten note to their key prospects. So that works well. One of my other very favorite sales-led GTM plays is an event-led play, which can either be the company hosting their own events, and that can be webinars, that can be LinkedIn Lives, it can be a live event like a small dinner or like a small networking event, or it can be attending other people's events. And one of the reason I love the creating a sales strategy around an event-led play is too often marketing owns it. And marketing creates generic one to every man copy. That is their job. And when we think about the quality of lead that is either attending an event we're hosting, or we look at the entire attendee list of an event that we're going to, and we pick the 20 people that we would just most benefit from meeting at the event, that should be a sales-led play. Marketing should not be owning those contacts. They should never be getting generic outreach. So that is the pivot in ROI when I'm able to work with clients to take that from being a marketing-led effort to being a sales-led event play is the results are pretty wild.
Okay, awesome. So you talked about those double tap and a
Yeah.
phone kind of cadence. When so just tell the cadence in for maybe for an account or for that particular person in like a month, or like what's your sequence like? Does it end in 21 days, 7 touch points? What's your strategy over there?
So I would say that my strategy is not black and white.
Okay.
Because I don't think it serves us being like the coaches, consultants, the sales leaders to say, here's the one thing that's going to work for your organization. So my strategy and approach is a little bit different. It is going to be following best practice for that industry and that seniority level of persona to make sure that I am creating sequences that have the right distance between touch points and the right channels. From there, we're going to test. Like the very first most important thing we can do before we can build repeatable processes is figuring out what that baseline looks like. And then once we have that baseline in terms of where in the sequence are we getting the most opens, asking questions like, hey, we ran a 12 touch sequence, but like 95% of engagement came at touch 9 or before. So maybe next time we just cut the last 3 steps or like rearrange them to make it a little bit tighter. Taking those like maybe we realize after running the initial sequences that 80% of our engagement came from, or 80% of our meetings came from cold calls. So then maybe we're going to put in more cold calls, or we're going to move them earlier in the sequence. So I am much less about here's the one template that you need to use. And I'm much more focused on, we'll start with sort of the best practice parameters. And then let's really see what the data is telling us so that we can iterate on that copy and on the channels and on the overall story the sequence tells based on how your prospects are interacting with it. But a couple truths would be a 3-channel approach is your best bet. Having at least 8 touch points is still really important. That's still an evergreen truth that has not gone away. And cold calls work in every industry. I've never met an industry where cold calls did not work, even if the result of the cold calls are not high pickup rates. Still being able to leave that voicemail or send that text message, still finding a way to use the phone, which is a primary method of communication for every prospect I've ever engaged with, is supremely important. So don't believe people that tell you that cold calling is dead. That's total BS.
Okay, so for all of this to work, you talked about the importance of data. So what KPIs do you use, and when do you sort of like say, okay, this is not working? So which KPIs will sort of like tell you, okay, move on, do something else?
Yeah, so we're going to need to run the sequence all the way through before we make any changes. And you're going to need to run it with at least 100 people to like really have a good set of data. So don't panic if it's not working out. Like let it run all the way through. Don't make changes mid-sequence. Don't stop it and start removing people. Like let it run. But on the flip side of that, don't take a boil the ocean approach and feel like you need to, in that first like 30 days, contact all 5,000 accounts in your territory. So test your content with small batches of your total territory or total TAM. Take that value-based segmentation approach to ensure you're creating the relevant, valuable content. And then once you have the data, obviously we're looking at revenue. I mean, that's what we want from all of this. But I understand that that's sort of a long tail metric. And often when folks are building outbound sequences, they want something that's a little bit more immediate. Like how do I know if this is working now when I can't wait for the 90-day sales cycle to see if the meetings that were set become opportunities that become revenue. So a couple of smaller metrics, I would look at positive reply rates. So we hear folks talk a lot about open rates. That's fine. I think open rates can often become a vanity metric. I'll use an example from a campaign I tested just last month. It had a 56.4% open rate, 0% reply rate. Right? So it's like, okay, great. That is more than, that's like a triple the industry average open rate. But who cares if it didn't get the replies? So I focus more on the positive reply rate. And you'll also hear a lot of folks talk about overall replies, but like then they'll build emails that say like, PS, if you don't want to receive any more emails from me, just reply stop. And then they'll include those emails and saying they got great reply rates. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. So positive reply rates are a big one. And then I would say the quickness with which your copy results in meetings. So are emails converting folks into meetings pretty quickly is something that I look at. What I would share with sales leaders, sales managers who are looking at those top of funnel metrics and thinking, what do I do with these? Is look for the specific things that you can change to help your ROI in your campaigns. And let me give you an example. Thinking about the conversion between open rates to reply rates. If I see that I have a really high reply rate, but a really low open rate, the first thing that I'm going to change the next time I run the campaign is all of the calls to action.
Okay.
Right. And then I'm going to run it again to see if a stronger, more clear, or more concise call to action changes the reply rates. Because obviously what's happening in that preview text is strong if you're getting that 56.4% open rate. But since I'm not getting the replies, that tells me that my call to action is not clear or not compelling. So yes, the metrics matter because we need to then communicate to our sales reps what they should do more or less of, but don't get too focused on the minutia of the day-to-day metrics when you are analyzing whether or not a campaign works. Think about the story the metrics are telling you so that you are making really smart strategic iterations on the campaign. So I'd say that's one side, like how do the metrics matter for the sales leadership or sales enablement? I would say the other side that I really, really look at is the number of new prospects that are being added to sequences on a weekly basis and the percent of on-time steps. And the reason that I look at those two things, one, sales is still a numbers game. I don't care what people say. That will always be true. Even if you are taking a very quality oriented ABM key accounts approach, you still need to get in front of enough people who are the right people that you are reaching them at the right time to buy and that they decide to buy your product. So it's still a numbers game. So we want to make sure we are constantly putting new prospects into our sequences. And then I look at the percent of on-time steps, because when we create these sequences, we're optimizing for a psychological effect called stacking, where we are staying ever present in the mind of our prospect. And we've all seen this in B2C plays, right? Where you see a product and all of a sudden it feels like it's everywhere. And finally you're like, gosh, I should really look into this. I'm seeing it everywhere. So it's that same sort of psychology that we are using when we stack our touch points. And if your reps are getting overwhelmed with too many touch points, they're going to lose out on the stacking effect because they're going to start delaying their outreach, or they're just going to start cutting it. And you see this most often with them just cutting the cold calls. And instead, you'll look in your SEP and it's just the disposition was didn't reach, right? And that reduces the overall effectiveness of the campaign, obviously. And it also mucks up your data because you don't really know what was happening because they started skipping steps and they stopped doing steps on time.
Okay, so which are your favorite tools? Obviously, you need a stack to work with. And which one are your favorite ones, which really work and which are easy to use? Obviously, shouldn't be too complicated.
So the tools that I use are a little bit different than the tools that I recommend to my clients because I am a small business owner and they aren't. So for sending emails, I use Apollo and Mixmax.
Okay.
I usually have my clients working out of HubSpot or Sales-Loft. And I have HubSpot as my CRM, but as a small business owner, or this would be true if you have folks listening that are maybe earlier stage startup folks, a tool like Apollo or Mixmax just makes more sense. Apollo especially because it is also a data tool and data enrichment tool. So if you're a small business owner, maybe early stage founder, Apollo is a great data tool. If you can afford it, ZoomInfo still does have more accurate data. No data tool is perfect. And ZoomInfo is really expensive, but I still think it's a good tool. I still recommend it to folks. There's a new one I've been playing with called Clay that's really incredible and has really really cool add-ons where you can scrape data from something like LinkedIn. So you can add in
Mhm.
like more of that segmentation more easily. Other
Mhm.
tools that I absolutely could not live without, for me, Canva. I love
Okay.
Canva.
Mhm.
I create a ton of
Mhm.
assets on Canva for many, many years. I used Canva as my content tool as well, like my content
Mhm.
scheduling tool. So that's a really um,
Mhm.
a really big one. LinkedIn, all of your sales reps should have LinkedIn. They should at least have
Mhm.
either a premium
Mhm.
account or sales nav. Like that's a
Mhm.
must if you're
Mhm.
selling
Mhm.
to like mid-market to enterprise. Um, I would also say a must is a conversational intelligence bot.
Mhm.
So Gong is probably the most like famous one. Maybe like Gong or
Mhm.
Clary are the names that you hear most often. I use one called attention.tech, and I am obsessed with it. Obsessed, and it's a lot
Okay.
cheaper. But I think it is such a mistake to have a sales team and not give them the tools that allow them to like have hard data, which puts them in a position to take ownership of their improvement. And that hard data can come from something like Sales-Loft, which shows on-time steps and which shows the response rates and the open rates. It can come from a tool like attention.tech, which tells you, like, let's say you use a MEDIC qualifying framework. So it tells you which of your MEDIC
Mhm.
steps you've got qualified, and you can put in whatever framework you want. It doesn't have to be MEDIC, but
Mhm.
it gives you objective data that tells you what you are getting right and also what you are getting wrong. And then
Mhm.
that puts both reps and their managers in the driver's seat to both train on the mindset and the skill sets that will allow them to better run those processes to make them more repeatable, more consistent, more durable, and also to rework their copy, their sequences, their channels to better meet buyers where they're at.
Oh, wow, awesome. Very, very valuable. So, so you talked about pattern interrupts, and let's just talk about some of those. I think that will add a lot of value to our audience.
What is it? Talked about what?
Pattern interrupts. So you
Oh, pattern interrupts.
obviously,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yes.
okay. Yeah. So pattern interrupt, for folks that aren't familiar with that terminology, is just doing the unexpected. So
Mhm.
pattern interrupt could be something really playful. If it suits your ICP, maybe you send a GIF in your
Mhm.
email, right? So
Mhm.
it could be something
Mhm.
like that. For me, I mentioned I really love doing handwritten notes. That is a
Mhm.
pattern interrupt because it is something that people aren't doing. So a pattern interrupt is just doing the unexpected, and it interrupts the pattern of your prospect dismissing you quickly because it's the same thing they're seeing over and over again. Other pattern interrupts that I think are really easy to roll out that people just don't do very often are the use of video, both in email as well as on LinkedIn. People just are
Mhm.
still not using video. On LinkedIn, voice notes still work. I would A/B test using a voice note as your first step in LinkedIn cold outreach, because it is a little bit weird when you see a voice note in your inbox from a total stranger and you can't read a transcript.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if you're going to use a voice note, maybe make it your second message and then make sure that there's some context as to what sort of goes back to the concept of removing friction when you are sending that deposit, like a case study or a white paper. Don't expect them to open the 48-page white paper and read all of it. Don't expect them to open the 45-second voice note without including at least one sentence to tell them like why it matters to them, why it's worth their time clicking play. But get creative. Pattern interrupts are a result of creative elements in your cold outreach. What I would caution individual contributors, sales leaders, etc. on is to first make sure that you have a very clear baseline of data so that you know what good looks like. And only then would I suggest you start adding those really creative touches into your copy, because then you can A/B test and have a clear view on whether or not GIFs or memes work for your ICP. You can have a really clear view on whether or not video has like that exponential lift for you, because video obviously takes more time. So it by having the baseline first, it allows you to be super creative and test whatever you want, but then have the clarity of whether or not it works, so that as you continue to follow that always be testing philosophy, you're doing it in a way that actually results in engagement and results in the the meetings that you need to have the pipe to have the revenue.
Okay, so this is another interesting thought that I came up. So there is this personalization part, and then comes obviously the pain point part. So how do you validate the pain point, if I'm reaching the right person or not, if that exists or not? What strategies will you sort of like use over there?
To validate whether or not you're talking to the right person, I would say two approaches. Approach one would be looking at those trigger events, creating that segmentation, and doing the work in your outbound motions to create a ton of clarity around what good looks like. And we were, talking earlier in this conversation about organizations having an ICP. They have an ICP, but it's often quite broad. So really making sure that you, as the individual contributor, the person that is owning the outreach, understands the trigger events and the mechanisms that will cause the different segments of that ICP to move. So I would say the first part is like, why would it matter enough to the person I'm talking to that they would want to spend their social capital butting up against the status quo to create change? And that's a big one, right? So think about that in your outreach. But I think the other part of it, and like where I really focus on the process with my clients, is from that like ICP and value prop definition through to really strong discovery calls, like call one. And then I would say it sort of moves to middle of the funnel after that, which I like to stay more in the top of funnel. But on the discovery call, you better have a tight process for your pre-call research, so that you are going very, very deep in your understanding of how you are going to earn the right to ask this prospect to consider using their social capital, their time, their budget, their resources to consider and ultimately invest in your product or solution. And I use the phrase earn the right very selectively, because that is, earn the right is my sales methodology. And the gist of it is asking yourself, what have I done to earn the right to make this ask? So if it is asking them to read an email, what have I included in that email that is valuable or relevant to them that has earned me the right to make this ask of their time? If it is asking for a meeting, what have I shared with them to build the trust, to build the credibility that justifies asking them to spend time learning more? And when you think about it on a discovery call, how have I prepared to deliver value in this meeting that justifies me asking, that earns me the right to ask them to have a follow-up meeting, to consider investing in my product or solution, and to use their social capital to push against the status quo to get this mutually beneficial outcome that that you would uncover on the call. But I think the pain point boils down to two things. One, you having enough clarity and doing enough research that you feel very confident you can earn that right from the jump, that you can offer that relevance and the value. And then two, when you have the privilege of engaging with your prospect, of interacting with your prospect, making sure that you are extraordinarily curious so that you're leading with that mentality of helping and of seeking deep understanding, but you're doing it in the context of the research you've already done. So you're not starting calls with a, tell me everything about you, I'm going to have you do all the heavy lifting. You're really showing up to be that trusted advisor, which folks often will call like a consultative sales approach. But I think consultative sales is something that folks feel like only matters at the enterprise level. And I would argue that that mentality of earning the right matters whether or not you're selling to mom and pop shops, SMB, mid-market, enterprise. It matters for every single sales interaction that we have.
Okay, that's awesome. That's obviously you explained it in full detail. So you have also mentioned write emails that prospects reply to. Just give me an example as to what that might look like.
Sure. Okay. So a few things that you're going to want to do to write better emails. One is stop worrying so much about the subject line and instead focus on the preview text. So the preview text is the first 80 characters of your email, and it's inclusive of the subject line. So go through and audit all of your emails with the question in mind, would this first 80 characters make me want to learn more if I was this buyer, if I was this prospect? Because in order to get a reply, we need to get an open. So that is step one. Go through and audit all your emails to optimize for that first 80 characters, which is the preview text. Something that's really fun when you think about preview text versus subject line is that once you have your baseline of what good looks like, you can get really creative with the preview text. And so this might look like starting with the subject line format that is working best right now, which is a 2-word subject line, both words capitalized. So testing that for a sequence and seeing what the open rates are there. But then going back and maybe you have a subject line that is a whole sentence. And you test that because it's less about the actual subject line and it's more about what am I saying in that first 80 characters that makes the person I've sent this email to think, I'm interested in learning more. Okay, so that's a really, really big one. A couple of other easy pivots you can make to your email copy to get better replies are to shorten them. You should never be sending cold outreach that is more than, I'd say, like 80 words. I use data from a company called Reggie.ai, and I really work hard to keep my copy between 16 and 68, 16 and 68 words. So you're keeping that copy very tight. Like it's usually 3 sentences, like the introduction, why it matters to them, a call to action. You also want to keep all of those, like all of your copy very concise, very straightforward. Between a 3rd to 8th grade reading level is what gets the best reply rates. I personally aim for grade 5. So short emails, 16 to 68 words, concise, straightforward, 5th grade reading level. And we talked about this a bit earlier, that your prospects are not reading your email, they are scanning it. So the reason that you are writing short emails with simple, concise language is to make it very easy for them to scan the email for context and decide not to delete it, so that you have a chance for them to read and hopefully reply later. And then I would say the third really easy pivot that folks can make is audit your emails to see how seller-centric your email language is. And seller-centric emails sound like, "Hi, Saad, I'm Leslie Vanetz, the founder of the Sales-Led GTM Agency. We do X. I want to talk to you because of Y. Our product is," right? It's that I, we, our language. And you want to change the language of your emails to be reader-centric or buyer-centric. So you want to use more you language, talking about the prospect, talking about their company, their challenges, their opportunities, or use customer language. Like if you're gonna use we or our language, make it like our customers have found versus I believe or I want to. So 3 easy pivots to write emails that get significantly more opens and replies. Audit for seller-centric language, I, we, our, and pivot that to reader-centric language. 2 would be just much more concise, simple emails. And then 3 would be optimizing for the preview text, which are the first 80 characters of your email.
Wow, awesome. Time and day?
I mean, test it. I usually prefer mornings, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't worry about time of day actually as much as I used to. What I worry about a lot more now is domain reputation. And why that matters is that instead of, like, I've been selling for 15 years, folks. I used to just do Excel lists with Microsoft Word and do a mail merge and send 300 emails out in 1 minute. If you're still doing that type of mass send today, you are demolishing your domain reputation. And as a reminder, having the strong domain reputation is what lands us in the primary inbox. And if you don't land in the primary inbox, you're in an other inbox, or maybe you're getting right to spam. So that's going to really make it hard to get those open and reply rates. So what I think about now, instead of like I have to get these emails out at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, is how many total emails I want sent from my domain on a given day, and then staggering those emails to be sent throughout the day. If you use a tool like a Sales-Loft, you can stagger them even at different intervals. So it's not even like 1 cent every minute. It's like 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 42 seconds. Like you can really make it appear that they are one-to-one emails so that you do not get flagged as spam and your domain rep doesn't get damaged.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So I guess I've pretty much taken up an hour. So anything that I missed, anything you feel like you wanted to add and maybe it's lost in the conversation?
I would say if you are that like founder or sales leader that is either asking yourself, or maybe just in general, if you're that founder or sales leader who is sort of thinking about their strategy from 2024 and feeling maybe some frustration or some helplessness that what used to work doesn't work anymore. And maybe that was that you used to have a really strong inbound funnel and it sort of died up, or your outbound used to get much better results and now you're just not seeing the results that you used to. don't panic, because outbound selling still works and it works really well. And outbound selling is still the primary driver of revenue for 90% of B2B organizations. But your outbound process needs to evolve, because what worked even 5 years ago does not work today. What was best practice even 3 years ago, I'm thinking of the quick question subject line, will get you routed immediately to spam today. So don't give up. Don't question your strategy of investing in outbound. That is still the right strategy, but you do need to acknowledge that it's time to evolve, to be more buyer centric. And because our buyers' expectations are changing so rapidly, that does mean that you will really have to embark on a process of continuous improvement, which can be a bit humbling and it can be a bit overwhelming, but don't worry, you will get there.
Wow, that's awesome. That's an awesome sort of like a note to end our conversation. So I actually loved our conversation, and I guess I felt like I could have gone for another hour. So, but I guess we pretty much. So I appreciate all the sort of like effort that you put in, and I truly believe this will add a lot of value to all of those listeners that are out there. So can't thank you enough, to be honest.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. I love talking about top of funnel. I love talking about
Mhm.
selling in general, but especially outbound selling and those sales-led go to market
Mhm.
motions. And it's so powerful to see folks when they lean into having that strategy that is rooted in creating repeatable processes, because
Yep.
that allows them to empower their reps with the mindset and with the skill sets to execute against those repeatable processes. And then that opens the door to getting to be creative and having so much more fun when you're selling, because you're getting the results. And then, of course, that leads to hitting those revenue and growth goals. So it is a topic I am so passionate about. Really appreciated this conversation. And thank you for everybody that listened.
Yeah. So, Leslie, where can people find you?
Find me on LinkedIn is easiest. So I'm at LinkedIn just under my name, Leslie Vanetz. I'm on most other channels, like Instagram, like YouTube, at B2B Sales Coach, but LinkedIn is certainly my primary. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Have a great day.
Have a nice day. Take care.